Hey, what's going on guys? Welcome or welcome back, and in this episode we're going to be going through the wave system. We're going to be defining how many enemies are on the screen, and then once all the enemies are destroyed, we're going to set up the new wave round, and then we're going to spawn the new amount of enemies. Alright guys, so the first thing we need to do is head over to your event sheet, and then what we need to do is, so in the previous episodes we added an enemy count, so we know how many enemies to spawn, but we also now need to determine what wave round it is, and also we need to add a variable to know when all the enemies have been destroyed. So let's add two variables. We're going to right click, global variable, and then we can just call this all enemies defeated, and then we want to set this to be a boolean, and we want this to not be initially true, so we'll use that to trigger a new round event once all the enemies are destroyed. And then just right click again, new variable, and then we just want to add like a wave number or something like that. Alright guys, so the next thing we need to do is we're going to head over to our enemies group, and we want to head to the spawning logic. Next, let's add a new event, system, we're going to compare two values, and we want to compare the enemies alive, so the enemy count, and we want to say is it equal or less than 0. So this is now how we're going to set up to start a new round. Next, add an action, system, we want to set the boolean, so set boolean, and then now we can set this to true. So when there's no enemies on this page, we can then set it to true. So next we can add a new event, system is boolean set. So if it's true, we also just want to add another condition, and we want to add a trigger once while it's true. And then now we can start setting our actions of what to do when we want to trigger a new round. So first thing, we want to set the round number. So we can set value, wave number, and we could just set this to wave number +1. Alternatively, you could also just, instead you could just do add to, and you could just do wave number and add 1 like this. They both do the same thing. Alright guys, so the next thing we want to do is we want to actually define how many enemies to spawn on the next rounds. Now this can be done a number of ways, and it really does depend on what you want to get out of your project, how complex it is, and also how many enemy types you want. Now, if you do have the paid version, I'm going to be showing you through two different methods here. With how complex this can get, I would highly recommend doing that method. If you have the free version, I'm going to show you a simple way how you can still achieve some kind of functionality, but it's not going to be as complex. Alright guys, real quick, so this is for those people who, if you do have the paid version, this is my project that I was using before, just to get things set up and test things out. So as you can see, we have the same spawning logic, and this is here what we've been creating a second ago. However, so what we're doing is, so to actually set the enemy spawns, we're setting a variable here. So this is the enemies alive variable, and then what we're doing is we're referencing a dictionary or an array. So if I head over to here, and I have dictionaries here, which is a feature that only the premium version have. So instead of using variables, I set up dictionaries, and then here is another dictionary which is all the different wave data. So this is just a template I've created, and as you can see, what I've done is down the left, I've got different enemy types, and then underneath each of these enemy types we have the different variables. So we've got health, damage, speed, things like that, and then at the top we have all the different waves. So what we can do is, so we can say on wave 1 we've got 10 enemies, 15, 15, 15. On wave 2, for example, we have 15 carrots. We have 1 potato. This is a very quick, I'm trying to go through it fast, but you can see how something like that could work. So you could manually, put in how many enemies you want for each different wave. Next, all you have to do is, so you set the enemies alive variable to reference the waves right here. So as you can see, this is the dictionary, and then we're setting which columns to use. So we're saying set the enemies to which actually aligns with the correct thing. Then what we can do is we can call an array loop, which is what we've got here, and then we just repeat this through each one of these columns. And then what we can do is we can then just set the different enemy counts. So for each different enemy type, you could have a different variable for each one. So you've got carrot, potato, and so you can just individually set a number for each enemy type, and then on top of this you can have one variable which you can use to combine them all. And then that's it for the spawning that way. You might have to pause this and it might sound a bit complicated, but it's simple once you understand dictionaries and arrays. You might need to watch a different video, but it's not that complex, and it's a much better way of going about doing this. And so then now, so if you use the free version, or you want a more simplified method or way of setting enemies, what we can do is we can just use a multiplier or something like that, and we can just keep increasing the number of enemies. There's a couple of ways we could do this. One way is you could manually define, up here, you could set different variables for different waves or how many enemies you'd like to have spawned. For this system right now, I'm just going to keep it very simple. What we could do is, so we could create a new variable, call it enemy count start or something like that. You don't have to create a variable, but it's just good practice. So we'll create this. Let's say, so the initial value when you start the game, we want that to be 10. We can then head back to our spawning logic and we can just say system, set value. And what we could do is we can set enemy count to enemy count start. And then we could just times this by the wave number. So that's a very simple way to go about doing this. But now, so every round, it will just times it by the wave number. So the first round will be 10, the second round will be 20, then, 30. And then that would depend on what starting number you have. You could also modify this to include some sort of formula. If you went online and you could search that, you could, do a more gradual increase in numbers. And so here at this point, it can be difficult to, just kind of give you a straight answer on do this and do it and exactly how to do it that way, because there's so many ways you can create a system like this. And it really does depend on what you want to get out of the project. Once it starts getting, to a complex level like this, it really is up to you. Because also, if you have the paid version or not, that also highly depends on what you're, capable of creating. Unfortunately, Construct limits you to only so many events. But anyways, to finish this system right now, what we can do is, we can right click, add a function, we can call it spawn enemies, and what we can do is, we can take this function here we created before, we can remove that from the start of layout, drag that in there, and then now instead we can just call that function. So now when we start the layout, we're spawning the same function, and at the same time, we can just call it here. So we're spawning enemies on the start of the layout, so we get the initial 10 enemies. When the enemies are set to 0, we're going to say all enemies are 0 to true, trigger this event, add 1 to the wave number, and then we're going to respawn enemies. On top of this, if you head back to your event sheet, we can quickly insert some text objects. We can drag this to the top left. I'll call this enemy count text. We'll duplicate this, right click, clone object. We can call this wave count text. Head back to your event sheet, we'll go to our every tick for now, and we can just add an action, text, enemy count text, set text. We can just say set it to enemy count. On top of this, you could also add quotation marks and you could put enemies left, something like this. And then just do the and symbol, enemies left and the count. Again, we can add another action, text, wave count, set text. We can put wave or round, and then we do and symbol again, and then we can just do wave number variable. Alright guys, so now that's out of the way, the last thing we need to do is we just need to actually update the count every time we destroy an enemy. So head over to your undestroyed event for your enemies. And so for example, I've got the enemy tomato undestroyed here. And all we need to do is we need to now subtract from. So we go system, subtract from, and we just want to subtract from the enemy count. And then lastly, if you head back up to your global variables, just make sure your wave number is set to 1. So it starts on round 1. Alright guys, so as you can see, when we test this now, the enemies are counting down. And when they now hit 0, it should start a new wave. Alright, great. As you can see, there's now 20 enemies spawning, and we're on wave 2. Alright guys, so that's it for this one. By now you should at least have some sort of spawning and wave system, regardless if you're on the free or the paid version. It really does just depend on how complex you want the system to be, and hopefully you can make some cool stuff and build off of this. But yeah, hopefully that's helped. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like me to include in the future videos. So yeah, take care guys, and I'll see you in the next video.